Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. You've obviously had your coffee. My name is Loretta Joseph. I'm a consultant at the OECD. I have a number of jobs. I work for another number of countries and governments around the world writing new laws and regulations about how this new blockchain world and the world of the digital economy works. Our panel today is a very interesting one, actually, blockchains and financial inclusion. So I'm going to get my panellists just to introduce themselves.
My name is Anya Nova. I work at PowerLedger. And PowerLedger is a company that builds and operates peer-to-peer energy marketplaces. And we're the world leader in this space. We have deployed our platform to enable communities to spin off their own energy markets in Australia and Thailand, Japan, and the USA.
My name is Clyde Bunnell. I'm a New York State Assembly member for the 33rd Assembly District. I am the chair for the subcommittee on Internet New Technologies. And I've been, since I've been in the New York State Assembly, I've been working intimately in the space of blockchain technology. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that New York State and the country is a place where we have responsible regulations in this space. Also, we want to make sure that the nation adopts laws that are, one, protects investors and the community, but two, also provides a thriving environment for businesses in this space to grow.
My name is Vanessa Grelette. I'm an executive director at Consensus, and I'm also the president of the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition that focuses on 4 pillars. Financial inclusion is one of them. The environment, identity and vulnerable populations, as well as supply chain. And we try to bring together innovators, states, foundations to work together to find solutions to these pressing problems.
So the financial inclusion part's probably the reason that I got into blockchain. In my past life, I was a banker. And I lived in India, and it was strikingly obvious that many people in India and actually around the world, I think the latest quote is something like 1.7 billion people don't have access to basic financial services. So what does that mean? It means that you can't have a bank account. It means that you can't get the money to educate yourself better. It means that you can't get the money to better your health, and you certainly can't become an entrepreneur. So, so financial inclusion has always really, really interested me. And blockchain, the technology, becomes very important now because if we look at what it can offer, so I mean, there are people doing voting on the blockchain, digital ID on the blockchain, these things that start to now give you the ability to have a credit score, which is very important because most of these people have absolutely no access to money. And when you can't have right over your land, you can't show that you own your land by land titling, which people are now trialling in blockchain, you can actually have access to get credit. So you think about blockchain as the technology, it opens up all these new advantages and it starts to include people who have never been included before. Obviously, cryptocurrencies and remittances is a big one because we disintermediate the middlemen. And middlemen create a lot of friction and they take a lot of money out of the equation. So I still do this every month. Living in India, I move $100 to my man who looks after my house in Goa. Now, some days that can take a matter of days. Sometimes it takes a matter of minutes. And last week, it took 17 days. Why? Because there's a number of banks in between it. Now, the $100 I send him doesn't matter to me, but that $100 to him is a significant portion of the amount of money that he feeds his family with. Disintermediation markets, I think, is a good thing. So, Anya, I'm just going to ask you, on the peer-to-peer energy trading, how do you think giving people electricity gets them to be financially included?
Yeah, so I look at everything through the prism of electricity because that's what we do at PowerLedger. And I think it probably is really obvious to me because of my upbringing how important electricity is for financial inclusion. And I grew up on an island north of Japan, and we frequently had hurricanes which would knock out the grid. So you end up having no power for days or weeks, and you actually have to plan when you do your homework as a kid, or when you cook, or when you do your laundry. So, and most people in the world live in those kind of conditions. They are lucky to have a few hours of energy every day. Some people, like 1 billion people, don't have any electricity at all. And I think blockchain actually has a very important role to play, and that's what we do at Power Ledger. And I'll give you a couple examples. The first and most obvious one is that blockchain is an excellent tool for fundraising. So you can create fundraising projects for solar farms in various parts of the world that don't currently have grid access, and building a grid would be too expensive. And a microgrid or a solar farm that feeds energy to the community could be the most optimal way to go. And normally, if you're trying to invest like that, every investor has to have the same rights and the same obligations. But blockchain being programmable money, you can actually give people optionality. So if I want to co-own a piece of that particular solar farm, and I want to do that in a way where I don't need to draw any revenue from that, I can. Or someone else could then come in and own another portion of that solar farm, and they want to do that purely as an investment. So because with blockchain and with tokens that represent that asset and that distribute the economic benefit, you can actually program them to be whatever you want them to be. So you bring in more capital into the space of renewable energy, and by doing that, you incentivize in adoption of renewables and giving people access to energy that previously didn't have any access. So that's just one example, and that's all about that asset-backed tokens that represent assets. And then a second example is for people that might have some access to energy but just don't get that energy in the most economical way. And that happens everywhere. It doesn't have to be just in less developed countries. So let's say you have an apartment building. All the owners of that apartment building decide that they want to install solar. The solar on the apartment building might cost $100,000. So if there's 10 of us, we go, okay, we each one going to pay $10,000. But then I go, well, actually, hold on, I don't want to do that because I'm never home during the day. So I'm not going to get the benefit of the solar, which is when it's produced. So then you get friction. People might not choose to go for a clean energy source, even though it's something that's super economical, might pay for itself in 5 years' time, and then you get free electricity. So blockchain solves that problem as well, right? Because I have my allocation of solar. I'm not home during the day, but I'm able to trade with people in real time. So the second characteristic of blockchain after being programmable money is it's like market creation powers, right? So you can actually get the data from each individual smart meter and help people to settle trades every half an hour. So then, in effect, you're de-risking that investment, and more people that live in apartment buildings or in communities like that can make the decision to invest capital.
So moving back over, I guess Consensus does a lot with a lot of institutions, Vanessa. How can existing financial institutions at the moment leverage blockchain and bring more financial inclusion to the customers that they don't have or they want to get?
So it's an interesting question, thank you. Currently, the financial institutions have some barriers into getting on board customers which are currently unbanked. They have huge cost of compliance, so they basically trade off the cost of acquiring a customer that doesn't have a lot or doesn't meet the existing qualifications. And so currently we don't see, especially in the US, a movement towards adding on these types of customers onto existing banking frameworks. There are opportunities, I would say, more in other countries. We've worked with Union Bank, for example, in the Philippines, where we created a blockchain solution for Union Bank to work with local banks, which did not have access to all the banking licenses and all the features that so they could serve their customers, which were local customers. So creating that blockchain empowerment between the two banks allowed them to serve better additional customers that were currently unbanked. I think the general movement that we see is more people creating new institutions for the unbanked so that they can have access to credit, they can have access to financial services outside the existing infrastructure, and that's a little bit more agile. We see initiatives in the remittance space, which allows for people to send money over through cryptocurrencies at a very low cost and at a very high speed. And this is not offered currently by the banks and financial institutions or the incumbents, Western Union and other money transmitter. So we see very exciting projects in that space, trying to give access to the unbanked to new services, and also weeding out all the existing lenders or day lenders, which usually have abusive terms for people who do not have access to bank accounts.
Yeah, it was just interesting. I was sitting outside with with BitTravel, who's one of the investments by Binance, and I was complaining that I was having to leave to go back to Mauritius where I live, and it's quite annoying to try and get there on a plane. And he said, why don't you use my app? So they've built an app called BitTravel. So you can actually now use Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to buy flights. I thought that was fabulous, because that's also a way of now including people that don't have money, don't want to use money, or don't go to a country and change money, to be able to use one payment across the world. And so have a look at it. It's really, really interesting. But sorry to digress there, Clyde. We haven't not heard from you yet. So you've been doing a lot of work in New York. Can you expand to us a little bit about the task force on digital assets that you were so graciously telling me about?
But first of all, Loretta, before I get into that, though, I do want to say that we're speaking about financial inclusion, and we spoke about people that are unbanked or underbanked, and we're sitting in the financial capital of the world, right? New York is the financial capital of the world, right? And there are neighborhoods and there are people right in New York City, right in New York State, that are unbanked or underbanked. Right here. We don't have to go to developing nations.
There's 5 homeless men out the front.
Exactly. So this is a problem that I sit on the banking committee, and we're trying to find solutions. We talk about solutions for people to have access to credit, access to financial instruments or what have you, and this is a major issue. And this is a major issue in the country, in this country, and in this state. And we're also talking about remittances, where, again, to get out of theory, I was dealing with my mother sending, money and value to Haiti. That's where my family's from, to Haiti, and to see how inefficient sometimes that process is. Or sending, or issue another thing to bring it back to the ground. Folks have come to my district office to sending money to whatever country it is, to try to pay the phone bill, the cellular phone bill for the folks in these other countries where they had to send the money through a money transmitter. They weren't too sure if the people received the money or not, because the phones were shut off at the time. Look at how inefficient this is happening right here in New York State. So this distributed ledger technology provides an opportunity to make this happen more efficiently. Access to credit, access to financial instruments is fundamentally something that can change and that will change lives and opportunities, not only for individuals, but our businesses. Our smaller businesses also are underbanked and unbanked, and don't have and have to deal with high interest rates and a lot of different kinds of barriers into these markets. So that's why it's important for us to be able to explore the possibilities with respect to this technology.
So can you talk to us a bit about the task force?
Oh, so it's interesting. In New York State, many folks are familiar with our different laws in this space, and we came out about 4 years ago. One of our state agencies came out with a certain type of license program that if you operate with respect to using digital currency in a certain kind of way, you may have to get a certain license in New York State. That was 4 years ago. That was a long time ago, what have you. But at that time, that regulation was done in response to a very bad hack for an exchange that resided outside of the U.S. Since then, a lot has changed. And since then, remember that at that time, there was no utility tokens. At that time, we were dealing in a world where there was one big major coin. Now there are thousands of coins. Now there are many different uses for this technology. So we did the New York State, the governor signed into law last year, the first in the nation digital currency task force, to be able to, where we're going to have experts in the fields of on certain leading coins, certain exchanges, investors, technologists, to be able to help guide on how to properly regulate in this space, to be able to help guide on how to define what these things are, what these assets are, and to be able to figure out what the proper level of regulation is. And the report, they have to provide the legislature with a report by December 2020. And this is something that the entire country, the world, will be looking at to be able to help guide us moving forward.
So in one of my other lives, I sit on a board to the Pope. Yes, the Pope gets blockchain. And we had a meeting actually last week with 100 technologists, and the biggest problem that the Vatican faces is that they are one of the largest institutions in the world which deals with refugees and people that are not financially included. So we've set up a how do we start to identify kids? Because one of the biggest problems they find in refugee camps around the world is that we're losing about 6 or 7% of all kids that go into refugee camps. They're not accounted for. Where do they go?
Wow.
They get trafficked. So we're looking at using blockchain for digital ID and maybe having some sort of cognitive response or using AI to track these kids. Now we have to start to incentivise people because they won't just include their child when they come into a refugee camp. So we're looking at a token form. If somebody registers their child and we make sure they're registered, can we give them tokens for food on the blockchain in all these refugee camps? I think that's a really powerful initiative, and certainly, that's one minority, people in refugee camps that are not financially included. They're not included in anything. But Esther, what about your consensus? What sort of projects are you doing that you see interesting outside just banks to include people?
On the financial inclusion side, I'll focus most on BSIC and our members. We have a company called Kalendi, which was supposed to be here today, and I think touches upon a very interesting aspect of the financial inclusion, which is the credit ratings. So currently, the framework for the credit ratings and the credit bureau is quite rigid, and people are trying to find solutions based on blockchain to assess creditworthiness of the unbanked, so that people feel comfortable when they come into commerce with them, that they have a holistic view of the individual or the institution, and finds enough point of reference in order for them to grant credit or give access to financial services. I think that's really key, again, in the perspective of not working with the existing solutions, but trying to find solutions that are outside the box, because given the number of the unbanked and given the challenges that we face, everyone now is on social media. Everyone now has a lot of touch points and references in their lives, which we didn't have access to before. And that allows for a better assessment of the creditworthiness of the persons, I would argue even better than the existing framework. So we see a lot of innovations in that space on blockchain and outside of blockchain to help people build that creditworthiness. Think about day workers, I don't know, in Pakistan. They get paid in cash every day. They have no proof that they've worked several years. They have no proof that they've, rented a certain bed or a space consistently. If that could be recorded on an immutable ledger, that is one proof point of their creditworthiness, which we take for granted. but is really key for them in order to move into a more inclusive world.
Yeah, no, I think the credit worthiness is a really interesting one, and I know a number of companies that are working on it, because it goes back to the point, we all have a phone. I don't have mine on stage now, but that device has changed everything. You know, in Africa, I do a lot of work in Africa. In West Africa, everybody has a phone. They may not eat, but they have a phone. In most of Africa and most of India, now they're the biggest emerging markets for the world. Once somebody has access to a phone, you have access to doing things on your phone that you used not to. So I think, you know, we could stake. Everyone uses Facebook. Everyone uses some sort of social media. There are solutions now in blockchain that we can stake our ID. You know, if we live in a village together and my address is the palm tree past the third palm tree on the left, that people know where I live. They may not know my address because I don't have one, but they can stake your credibility. So I think there's some blockchain projects that are helping do this, because if we know our neighbours, as we used to, any person in a village knows everyone, if we can all now stake our reputation on saying that person is who they are, then that's a good start as well. So you said any other interesting projects, Anya? Moving out of energy?
Oh, just probably more to the point of what you just said about the phone, because of course, right, like if you have a phone, you can participate in the worldwide global economy, but you have to have a place to charge that phone. So it's almost like before we can talk about banking the unbanked or having ID or transferring tokens to people, we just have to talk about the electricity, right? It's like a fundamental problem that you have to solve before you can start solving anything else. Because without electricity, you don't have access to industries, you don't have money that you need to do something with, right? And it's just...
Yeah, it's a very, very good point.
Yes, and it's like 1 billion people that don't have any access at all, and another couple billion that have intermittent access. So that's why I feel so strongly about working for Power Ledger, because I see us making a really direct impact in that space by facilitating co-ownership of renewable infrastructure and bringing more capital. And what blockchain enables is, again, combining funds from different parties who might in the past have never agreed, right? So you can combine funds from non-for-profits that want to invest with retail investors, with institutional investors, and start actually closing that gap between people that have electricity and people that don't.
Clyde, I don't know if you knew much about that, but that just triggered something in my mind. Apparently there was a pilot done in New York giving tokens on their phones to homeless people, and there was tokens for food.
I don't know about that program, but what we're working on in New York State is, in Loretta, in New York State, we're passing a bill passed in the Senate, what is a smart contracts bill, and we're trying to pass it in the Assembly. And if that passes this year, when we will actually do use case, the state themselves will actually implement some use cases. Here are a couple of ones that we're thinking about. I sit on the Gaming and Racing Committee, and an issue is interesting what you talk about tracking children in refugee camps. There's an issue about us tracking thoroughbreds. The lifespan of a thoroughbred, well, the professional lifespan of a thoroughbred is, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, I think. And they, those horses live to 30, 40 years old.
And they're worth a lot of money, those horses.
They're worth a lot of money. But, one of the issues is in the United States, we don't eat horse meat. I don't think we do. And, we don't eat horse meat. You don't, it's a thing. So one of the things is that we have to prevent the horses from being sold to folks that may sell the horses. So they don't track the horses well, right? The horses need to be tracked well or what have you. So
it's like a providence of goods, I guess.
Yeah. So blockchain would be an interesting an interesting thing to work on with respect to that. Another major issue is using blockchain with respect to using this technology with respect to elections and voting. Just 3 years ago, in Kings County, 200,000 voter records were expunged, lost, just like that. And we're talking about a time where, this is in America, this is in New York State, and that's happening, and this is in my state, and that happened. So it would be interesting to put, voter records and voter files, forget about voting on the blockchain, but just the actual records and the transactions on distributed ledger technology. Another thing that's interesting too is in my office we get calls relatively often from people that are pretty angry when because the state sends mail about their mother or their grandmother to vote and their parent or their grandmother died 3-4 years ago. Part of the issue is the data silos and the Office of Vital Records doesn't communicate with the Board of Elections or what have you. What if we put that on a blockchain or what have you?
They've actually done a really good in Sierra Leone. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Sierra Leone. Not the safest of places to go, but they did all their voting on the blockchain, and it worked really, really well. And what it also did, it brought in a group of the community, because Sierra Leone's a bit scary. When they started to vote, they started to ID people. So I think this all comes back to digitally IDing and things like voting, land rights. It all opens up financial inclusion, just using the technology. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left. Oh, wow. Okay. You didn't even wait. Okay, we have a question right here. That was very ferocious.
Yeah, I've been waiting. So my question is, how do you balance financial inclusion or inclusion in general with exposure? I'll give you some context. I'm from Zimbabwe, and last year I was back home and I was cycling around the villages in Matabeleland, and they are excluded from politics, they're excluded from banking and electricity, and we're really happy, healthy people that are living sustainably, like on their own. So how are we making sure that when people are included, they're included into something good, and that it's running in parallel with balance with policy and all the other things that are required?
Do you want me to have a go? Well, it's choice, right? Bitcoin started. Bitcoin is an opt-in or opt-out. If you opt in, you play by the rules. If you don't want to be in, you don't play by the rules, you don't come in. So I think that's the whole preface of decentralisation and things like Bitcoin. It was built not to make everybody do it, but it was built to say, if you are part of the network, then you are under the rules of the network, and nobody's better than anybody else. We all have the same power in the network, but you choose to play by the rules of that.
I actually think it's a phenomenal question. It's a great question, and I don't think there is a straightforward answer to that, because when we're talking about banking the unbanked, it sounds like we're doing an excellent thing for these people that don't have banking. But in reality, we're also doing an excellent thing for financial services companies who are increasing their customer base. I don't have an answer to that, but it's something we should think about.
Maybe it's education so that you're making an informed choice. I agree, like, choice is it, but maybe it's saying that this is the deal, in or out. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's education.
No, what I think is that it's very important to be able to expose and educate folks that have been traditionally or historically outside of the questions with these different financial opportunities, to be able to do that. I think that this technology provides, because it's new, because we're talking about something that is 10 years old or what have you, it provides an opportunity for now, while it's early, to be able to bring folk in that have been traditionally left outside of these kinds of things.
Well, that 30 minutes went very, very fast. Thank you to my panellists. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
If you've got any questions, we'll be around so you can come and ask.